Now, it seems like every time we restore a bike, there's a unique story, and this is no exception. Now, this is a bike Luciano had bought up in the Middletown area. I went up with him, we picked up the bike, and of course it needed an awful lot of work. Now, the problem is these handles were all chewed up, and among other things, they needed to be sanded down and repainted. This little piece that goes in the back of the seat was scratched. That, of course, repainted up without a big deal, not a problem at all. Now, what's happened, and some of these pictures are not in exact sequence because I had to use two cameras, and that's part of course, the adventure, to do this. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But anyway, these are the side panels, and of course, the thing with buying these used bikes is when they're all scratched up and dented up, you get them real cheap. Sometimes you get them for $1,000 cheaper than what they're supposed to go for. And when they're all painted up and shiny and polished, sometimes you get $1,000 more than what the asking price should be. But anyway, and in this case, one of the dilemmas we had, and Luciano spent a lot of time, he wanted to make the bike black in the very beginning. And then he remembered he had this is the paint left over from the last R6 I painted for him. And we had enough paint to paint this bike, and it's almost an exact match to the frame. It's a very close match, in fact. So again, the story was, right in the beginning, what we didn't know, we thought on the way back from picking up the bike we're going to paint it black. Well, that didn't turn out to be that way. And I always take a couple of pictures from every angle just for record's sake. Now, and again, there's some funny, I don't know how funny they are, but we did these things a few pieces at a time because we had several other bikes in the shop at the same time. Now, the front fender, because it's plastic, and this was really chewed up on the edge. Now, the thing I like to do if I can is use as little body filler as possible and sand as much as possible. Well, sometimes you can't do that. Now you can see how scratched up this is. It almost looks like somebody did this on purpose, or they were a slob, or both. And the trick here is, and we're gonna do this. Normally I would have used 600 paper, but Luciano had just picked up some 400, so I thought, oh, okay, make my life easier. And sometimes the rougher grades of paper, the reason I don't like to use them is they wind up scratching the plastic in such a way that the plastic melts. That's especially true with some of the Ducati parts I've painted, some of the Japanese parts, GS side covers, GS fenders, some of the older plastic, 750 Honda stuff, it has a real tendency to melt. So the trick here is, and I always think if we get away with this, it's really wonderful. We can sand down, etch the surface. This is with 400. Once that part's ready to paint, and again, this is something that we wanted to do, is save these little rubber pieces, because having to take them off and glue them back on, it's in a part of the bike you're really not going to see. But I know if you leave these out, you wind up getting a front fender that has a resonant vibration or a rattle in it. So it just happened that some of this was, we went out for Mexican food, and I never miss a chance to take a picture with a Mexican hat on. And it was time for the clear, and what happened, we had pretty much gone through the last clear that Luciano had purchased, and Glenn bought a gallon, and now Luciano bought a gallon. So I don't even know whose gallon we're using now, but once the clear is on here, and you can get a little view of how that works out. Now, we're anticipating that we're adding quite a bit of value to the bike when we do this. Now here's where it gets tricky, because I had to use a different camera for this part of the job. What happened, I was wet sanding, and the camera fell out of my pocket and fell into the jar of water. And it's going to be okay, but the day I did this, and it had enough water in the lens that I couldn't get the lens clean, and then I just wound up using the backup camera. So these are a little out of sequence. This actually was the end of the job. And this is the gas tank, of course. Now, you can see what's happened here. This is pretty well scratched up. Again, I don't know what happened. And there's some mystery paint on here. Now, mystery paint, somebody tried to touch this up with paint that it was either lacquer or it's something that was not compatible. This has the look of somebody hit it with a .22 caliber bullet. And you never really know. So if this were my bike, and I would be tempted to strip off all the old paint, but of course then it really gets to be labor intensive. And in the case of Sophia, I did that, and some of the other bikes. But these bikes that we're trying to do what I call the lick and a promise job on, just make them look nice temporarily. And of course, there's a sneaky thing about this bike. I think I've ridden this exact bike. My friend who recently passed away, Frank Straub, he had this exact bike, and I love this bike. And Luciano, I think, is going to fall in love with this bike once he starts riding it. Now, this had a real dent, had a .22 caliber bullet shot through it. I don't know what the guy did here. This wound up being more of a problem than I could imagine, because no matter what I would put over this, Bondo, red lead, or paint, it never really dried the next morning. And so I got really frustrated with this, and I wound up ultimately taking a Dremel tool and getting this right down to bare metal. Probably what I should have done in the very beginning. And I wound up, I thought maybe the Bondo was getting old. I wound up running out and buying a new tube of Bondo. Well, it all worked out in the end, but during this, I was really getting cranky with this, and Karen even mentioned, what's the matter? Your paint isn't drying today. And whenever you have a contamination issue, now see, there was touch-up paint up here, touch-up paint here, touch-up paint here. This was a dent. This was a dent. The other side was dented even worse, and it was this side that was the real issue. But again, the good thing about any paint or any Bondo is you're never really married to it. You can always just take it off and redo it. So, and which is exactly the case of what I did. And when I talked to Luciano, he didn't understand. I couldn't explain carefully what was going on here. But it actually was this dent. And this is about the third time I redid it. And I was really getting cranky with it. And no matter what, I can only surmise there was something silicone on that metal, even though I used degreaser. I don't know. You never really do know. Now, one of the things we learned in the last couple of years in doing these projects, in the past we'd always replace the decals. Now the decals have gotten so expensive that we've tried to save them on these projects, and of course this is an economy restoration. And so what we've done is I got this real thick, it's really just packaging tape, but they make it with several grades of stickiness, and you want the one that's the least sticky. And if you don't have that, take a clean t-shirt, put the tape down on the clean t-shirt, pull it up off the t-shirt, it'll be a lot less sticky. Then I've got to go around all these letters with a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, and what the clear allows you to do is get around each corner. Now Luciano priced out these two decals were $40, and so I tend to think maybe this was a good deal, and you always wind up paying shipping too. $72 for shipping, as we all know. Anything you buy from anywhere, they hit you for the shipping. But anyway, and then we're back to this, where this stuff really wasn't, anywhere there was touch-up paint, it was a problem. And so I kept going back and forth and back and forth and redoing the bodywork, and I eventually got it. And I really thought, boy, at the end of this, I was thinking I should get the Congressional Medal of Honor or something. Or something. Nobody really knows what. Or at least get a New Mexican hat. Anyway, now we got the blue that this came from the R6 project. And I really like the way that paint looked. The problem is, it's not an exact match, but it's really, really close to the color the frame is. Now, in the course of doing this too, in the middle of doing this job, Luciano decided he didn't want to, the fairing that was on the bike was in worse shape than these parts, and he decided he's going to make a Streetfighter and buy this little baby fairing, like a half fairing. And when he put that up where the fairing should go, he didn't like the way that looked, so he wound up buying a headlight. And I haven't seen the bike all in one piece yet, so anyway, here's the other thing you want to heat with a hairdryer. You want to heat it, just warm it. You don't want to heat it so that the Scotch tape pulls up the decal, because these decals probably have a very similar glue to this. So it's very difficult to get that balance point. And for anybody who doesn't know about my movie star glasses, you know, every time I send out a video, somebody says, get a pair of glasses. These glasses, women find you very attractive if you're old and gray-haired like I am. They're so busy looking at the glasses, they don't notice you're getting bald. So anyway, beside the point, this stuff comes off. Now, when you pull a Scotch tape up, it always seems to leave a little bit, just a little bit of the... let me get rid of this. This is crazy here. A little bit of the stickiness, and it'll pick up the dried paint that comes off of here. So now what I found works is M600 and a Q-tip, and I go around the perimeter of each letter and then scrub it, and then at the very end, when all of the goop is up, a very clean brand new paper towel with a few drops of M600 on it, and we basically have just saved a $40 decal. Now in this case, the decals weren't really perfect. They had some scratches and chips similar to the rest of the paint. So because we're not painting the decals, I had a little bit of concern that that might not look exactly to what I had in mind. But as soon as I put the clear on this, I said, wow, we're ready to go here, baby. This is going to be, when Luciano assembles this bike and gets it up the mountain, this is going to look way better than a brand new bike. Way better. But then, you know, all of the painting, you would think after all this work, you could at least make it better than 99% of the bikes on the road. And some of the factory jobs are better than others, but none of them are this good. They don't ever, you can always feel the decals and feel the stripes and all these sticky things they glue on a tank. When you do this and clear everything, I think it looks a lot nicer. Again, all in the eye of the beholder. It's blondes and brunettes all the way, but for all purposes, this is going to be a real nice tank. Now he's also got the From China gold gas cap that I think adds a nice little touch. He's got the Renthal bars similar to my bikes. 4 of my bikes have the Renthal bars now. Everybody seems to like those Renthal gold bars. And so once you get to this point, now there's the very labor-intensive part of this, is wet sanding out the clear. And this I do with 600. You can do it with 1,000 or 1,500, but to get it all knocked down, any little imperfections, any little wrinkles in the bodywork still, all around the decals as much as possible. And this takes several hours. This is not a, you know, when you look through the pictures, you think this all went in 10 minutes. Well, yeah, it really didn't go in 10 minutes, but anyway, when you get it all blocked down, now in the near future, when we do Glenn's Ducati parts, Glenn wants to pick up the skill of doing this, and I think that'll be real handy. Then I'll basically be able to, the same way I did with Larry, is get him to do a lot of the work, and we'll be able to crank out a bike in half the amount of time in the future. And it's just a hand-eye coordination skill. It's not like building a rocket to the moon or a model airplane or anything complex. It's simple labor. And maybe that's why that Mexican hat, we wear a Mexican hat when we sand. I don't know. Anyway, this is the second coat of clear on here. It's actually the third. The first 2 are already sanded. And this is the final coat of clear, drying in the bright sun. And when I look at it, my test here, I didn't make this picture because I don't know what my nose looks like. I always like to look, the test of a good paint job is, now this is my house. I always say you can watch TV in it, and I always like to see if I can see my reflection in it. If I could see my reflection in the paint, then I'm real happy with that work. Now, back to the other parts, and again, this is what, I had to be flipping cameras back and forth here. I eventually got the other camera dried out. And by the way, if you ever do drop a camera in water, there's supposed to be a lot of ways to save it. I took a hairdryer and just kept, you know, and some compressed air, and I think I got it salvaged, but you know, we're going to find out in the near future. Anyway, here's our latest thing that we're kind of dealing with here. Is we got to backtrack now, because again, the pictures are not really in exactly the same sequence. I have to move everything around here. So what happened is, during the course of doing these parts, and I always take pictures of the damage, and because I sometimes, after the part is painted, I'll see some rough areas, and then I want to look back and see, is that the part where the Bondo or the red lead or the sanding or whatever. And again, in this, all of these parts had scratches. Even this part, you can see, and I wonder how somebody can take care of a motorcycle or not take care of it. But again, this is the reason he got way under book value for this when he sold it. And for a bike with, I think it's got less than 10,000 miles. And I know these engines are totally bulletproof. So, and we basically repeat the same process on the other parts. This was another thing. The handles, since we're doing these not in sequence, you would think the handles on the bike, on the back of the seat, how can you scratch them up? What do you have? The claws like a bear or something? But shoot up, nothing you can't fix. And that's the beautiful part about all of this kind of work, is you can get a bike pretty much, like, as I said, for a really good price. The more scratches on it, the lower the price is. And if you're willing to do the sanding and you're willing to do the minimum amount of work, and again, for me, it can vary depending on how many hours, but we have several bikes lined up for future projects. Danny, his R6 over the winter next year will probably get a full repaint. Glenn's Ducati is going to get some repaint work on it. And I just think what's really nice about this, now here's another thing. When I did the little lettering that was on here, I tried to use this masking tape. I should have used the other tape, but really, it's not a critical thing. But now if you're trying to cut out letters, and I wasn't, you really can't see through the tape accurately enough, I guess, unless you have Superman vision. But again, all these parts, there's a lot of sanding goes into them, and you wind up using an awful lot of sandpaper and just getting these scratches out. And every time I do this, I wonder, how can somebody abuse stuff like this? I mean, I wonder how this guy treats other things in it. Is his TV all scratched up? Or I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be this guy's puppy, that's for sure. Anyway, these parts, and again, once the scratches are sanded out, if they're really terrible, it just takes a lot more work. You can see here where this is down through the factory paint. And what we were trying to do is not prime the part. If we were down to bare plastic, we would have almost had to. But when it's this kind of a job, and I'm going to identify this as being like a lick and a promise job, and it probably constitutes about 40 to 50 hours of labor and maybe $200 worth of material. But in the end, you have a bike that, as I said, when it's all scratched up, you probably take a hit of $1,000. And when it's looking like that, you probably get $1,000 more when you sell it. So when you think about doing $2,000 worth of value added, then those hours kind of blend away. And for me, there's a lot of satisfaction in doing these older bikes, because I know, number one, there's no way, some of these bikes you can't even get the parts for, or when you get them, they're worse than the ones you're replacing. I had bought a set of GS side covers that the guy guaranteed me were in like new condition. The tabs were broken, they had stress cracks in them, and paint was chipped. But that's the world of motorcycling. Anyway, these, as you can see, I just wanted to show these are out of sequence photos. But as long as I had the parts off, I sanded down all the machining marks and the tooling marks and things like that, so they would look a whole lot better. And the object is, when this bike is all put together, and he's got his little the headlight on now instead of the fairing. And by the way, what was nice about it was when he got the bike home, put gas in, it started right up. It does not look like it even needs a set of plugs. So, and I think he's going to get a couple of accessories, a Yoshimura muffler, among other things. But anyway, we'll see what he's got. When I get some pictures, I always forward the pictures, and we'll see what he's got. Again, these things, and if you upgrade each piece as you go along, the final product just gets better and better and better and better. And in the end, and if you do it and it's a problem like I had with the bodywork, there's no reason you can't do it over. That's the beautiful part of paint. There's no part of paint that you can't sand it off or remove it and start all over again. It's not like boring out a cylinder, where you bore the cylinder out and whoops, I went too big. Oh, you can't put that material back. I drilled a hole. Ah, the hole's too big. Yeah, paint is a wonderful material that, and I like to use it, of course. This is probably 50 plus years I've had a spray gun, so. And when I look back over my illustrious career to guitars, boats, things that I painted beside motorcycles, and of course the literally hundreds of model airplanes, and maybe a couple hundred motorcycles, because when I look back, and then even into the 60s when I was painting these things, and I look back over the years, and there's just some part of painting, and I wish I could put it in a jar. And I think the people like the late Larry, the Turi, when he learned the skill of painting, he had a smile on his face, and he felt empowered. And he was, every time he would come over here, he'd have some other part of his bike ready to repaint. And I know he felt really good about it. And, you know, as I look through these pictures, and I just try to go through them again, it makes me really feel like there's no part of this that's really super high tech. And I really look forward to spending some time with Glenn and in trying to pass along the skills. And his Ducati's a great bike to practice on, because it needs a lot of little touch-up work. And you can do it one part at a time. While some of the parts are drying, you can even ride the bike. And in the end, the only thing that's hard to do is to get this Mexican hat off before Luciano buys another bike.